Hey, what's up? How you doing? Hanging out in Pompano Beach, Florida. One of my last couple of days here in Florida. I've got Chewy, my buddy Avi's dog, chilling with me, and briefly introducing this episode of the Circle Up podcast, featuring none other than the executive director and founder of Jack.org, one of my good friends and mentors, Eric Windeler. Eric's been on the show before. He has over a decade of experience in the mental health space. And so when I think about who do I want to listen to, who do I want to be informed by, whose insight do I want to consider when I am contemplating how to set my sail, meaning how to set my personal philosophy in my life, when I decide how to navigate the rough waters at times that is this life we live, when I'm thinking about how to set my sail, I want to listen to people who are masters in what they do. And there's no one that I trust more in the space of mental health, youth mental health, and leadership. Because not only has Eric been involved in the space of youth mental health education, but he built an organization that spans all of Canada and that is influencing the world globally on how to talk about, think about, and feel about our mental health, especially for youth. So if you're interested in learning out how to take care of yourself, how to be there for someone else, especially around how to have difficult conversations, Eric shares an anecdote from after his son Jack passed away by suicide, about going into the university and talking to the faculty and talking to the students. And I think it's a hugely powerful story about how to be there for the people around us and how to ask difficult questions and how to take a stand for someone that you see that's struggling. So, in this time, we're about to go into another winter. Depending on where you live in the world, I highly recommend checking this out, whether it's because you want to implement better habits for your own mental health, you want to be there for others, or you have that desire to be a better leader in your life, which I know a lot of our listeners do. So without further ado, what I'm wondering from your perspective to kick this off is about context, because the reason I started Circle Up was to have more of a modern conversation about men's mental health. And one of the big things we talk about is that everyone has mental health. And I think, you would have seen over the last year with the pandemic and with COVID that everyone does have mental health because everyone's being impacted by it.
Yeah, it's so true. I think back 11 years ago before I got into this space, and most of your viewers or some of your viewers will know we had that sort of harsh and unwelcome entry into the mental health space when we lost our son Jack, who we didn't even know was struggling. If only for a Jack.org, if only for a Circle Up at that time, he'd probably be here today. It is something that doesn't pick and choose; it just strikes. And I agree with you so much that every conversation is a step in the right direction. How you have those conversations is important, for sure. But every step is an important one. And I just think about how it's impacted me personally. Building up to the start of this pandemic, and I know how much it's helped me get through this personally, because you can't do the good work you're trying to do unless you're also taking care of yourself, right? That is so critical. And I do want to get into a little bit of that today, how some of the coping mechanisms I've built up to handle my, frankly, physical and mental health, because the two are also interlinked if you think about it.
Yeah.
If you're feeling good, it helps you feeling good physically and strong and energetic. It helps with your mental health as well. But it's so true that every single person needs to learn how to interact with their mental health and hopefully have the comfort to interact with those around them, the people they care about. Why wouldn't you want to support the people who are important to you in your life? And mental health impacts them all at one point or another. And like we know, it's a spectrum. It can affect some people much more, but it goes up and down throughout your lifetime, sometimes throughout your day. or week. I've been I won't go off on a tangent, but I've been supporting a great friend of my older sister's in this past period of time, and you cannot believe what he's gone through with mental
Mm.
health and addiction challenges. And suddenly, he's come out the other side. And I think it's the critical support he had, largely from my sister, but also from me from a distance. He's in Nova Scotia. That's made a meaningful difference for him, and that makes me feel good, which reinforces everything I want to do about mental health.
Yeah, there's an interdependence with our relationships where I need to fill myself up so that I could give to those around me. And then it's a leaning on each other. Alan Watts, who's one of my favorite philosophers, talks about the Chinese symbol for man, and it's basically two sticks leaning on each other. And he said, fundamentally, we're there for each other and supporting each other. You take one away and it falls over. And so there's this idea of interdependence where what's best for me is best for you, what's best for you is best for me. And I need to fill myself up first to be able to give there. Because if you weren't over the last year taking care of your mental health, going out in the woods and being active and hiking and doing the things that actually fill you up, Eric, then there's no way when this opportunity to support someone, to be there for someone came up, that you'd be able to give much.
It's so true. It's so true. You can't view that as selfish. You got to view that as critical, and that's what you're doing with Circle Up, especially with this important demographic of I assume largely young men who are pretty new to this whole topic, and probably it's been pretty stigmatized and all the rest of it in their lives. And leaning on one another, being vulnerable to be open about how you're feeling, and that's going to get the other person to open up a little bit, and knowing how to support them in that moment is critical. And I've often said, where would we be as a family if we had just gone in a corner and kind of, you know, sulked, just been sad. I, I, I can't imagine, our mental health would have been so much more dramatically impacted. But getting out there and doing something to give back also really helps. And that can be micro. Not everybody has to start Circle Up, not everybody has to start a jack.org or even be a Jack Talk speaker or anything like that. There's small ways, that you can support the important people in your life. And I'm all for it. That is for sure.
Yeah, I know. I couldn't agree more. I want to preface my next question around who you are and how I see you. The reason I'm going to do this is because I had a mentor recently tell me, he said, avoid getting advice from people. And I said, why is that? And he said, well, because you know most about yourself. And unless they have a very specific expertise in the area that you're looking for advice in, then they likely don't know more about what's best for you than you know what's best for you. But as an example, if I need legal counsel, I'm going to go to a lawyer who has an expertise in that subject. And so that came up around sharing what's on my mind, sharing my challenges, and then rather than getting advice from a bunch of people, I could do the introspection myself. And the reason I bring this up is for those that are listening to this show, wondering why it's important and if should I take Eric's advice or thoughts or ideas. And the answer is yes, because we've talked about how you've been in this space for over a decade. You've had your finger on the pulse, so to speak, of the mental health landscape for over a decade. You were thrust into this in obviously a very unfortunate way. But over the last 10 years, you've really gained an expertise, a mastery of this subject, and most importantly, been paying attention to it. And so where I want to go here is a lot of people over the last year have struggled for a number of reasons. Everything is linked, right? My financial success and my career success relates to my relationships, which relates to my mental health, relates to my physical health. So it's all connected. But I'm wondering, what is the most important thing, or what have you noticed most in the last year in the mental health landscape? What's changed or what's stayed the same? What's been the most poignant thing that you've noticed that we could start to pay attention to on this call?
Well, that's a big one. There's so many things, but the things that jump to my mind is the people who are already struggling are likely struggling more. But a whole new cohort is struggling. People that probably would have been just happily going away at third year university or starting their new job or all the rest of it, and things have been unsettled for them. And I reflect and compare that to what I've learned. And I think, people like yourselves, a lot of people in the young people in the Jack.org network, and hopefully those that they have touched, have built an understanding of how to take care of their own mental health that has helped them through this period of time. And I would say I wouldn't be where I am today in terms of how I feel if I hadn't built up those skills, honestly, in the last decade. But I've really tried to accelerate those probably in the last 3 or 4 years as I really started to learn about it, to build my routines, which have really helped me get through this. And in some ways, not always, but some ways I've even kind of thrived a bit through this period of time because I've kept at it, or at least certainly maybe compared to others. And I'm not trying to make that a competitive thing. I'm just saying it's helped me get through the worst of that. And that all kinds of things. It is from exercise and diet and eating well and making sure, like you wouldn't believe, I track my sleep every single day. I could tell you how I slept, 17 days ago, just by a quick review of that log in my phone. But those things become habitual, but they're what I call good habits, right? And I've also learned over the last several years how to eliminate those bad habits that can have a detrimental effect on my mental health. And they're going to be different for everybody, but there is some real key learnings there that people can take away. I'm not sure if that's addressing your question, Jonathan. But
Yeah, there's a lot of good. There's a lot of good in there. Particularly, what came to mind is thinking about your friend who was experiencing this challenge, and what you were saying was people that were struggling were more likely to struggle more during the last year. And obviously, there's this new cohort that's struggling as well. But I want to talk about that struggle, because we started off the show by talking about everyone has mental health. And the way we describe it during our Jack Talks is that there's a mental spectrum.
Yep.
Right? There's healthy, stress, struggling, crisis. And then there's even another spectrum that helps you to reflect on mental illness, from no symptoms to very challenging symptoms and present daily. And so this idea of there's a mental health spectrum, and those that are struggling are more likely to struggle more. That's why I think this concept of being there for each other and showing up for each other. And in Circle Up, we talk about it as masculine care. We describe it as a ruthless compassion, because if I see someone in my life who's struggling and I don't take a stand for them, then if they get to a place where they're in crisis, well, the whole definition of crisis is they're not in control anymore. And so that's when we have outcomes like suicide as an example, or harming someone else, or harming ourselves. And so can you talk a little bit about that part of, because we talked about all of them, right? Like right now I would consider myself to be healthy, but there's times where I've been stressed. There's been times that I've struggled. And the key is to figure out what works for you to go up the spectrum, right? So can you talk to me about this struggling area of the spectrum, and then we'll go to stressed after that? So this struggling area of the spectrum where you're likely to deflect, deny, avoid these conversations. You likely don't have the energy that you once had. You're likely, this manifests for different people in different ways. Can you talk to me a little bit about what you've learned about that struggle? Because it seems like it is a real challenge for our culture right now.
Yeah, I think it's relevant to think about it both in terms of yourself, but sometimes it's even easier to identify with it by noticing what's happening in someone close to you, and then kind of reflecting that learning back on you. Right. And so, I mean, I can often put this in a very personal sense with the story about my son, but I won't do that right now. But, let's say my regular buddy I play squash with, okay, just in normal times, right? I'm not doing that right now. But let's say he's never available for games all of a sudden, or he, is playing horribly, or he's snappy. He's just not himself. There's any kind of signals like that could be a signal that someone is struggling. And, technically in a Jack Talk, I think you guys refer to the prolonged change in behavior, right? Not a day, not one bad day, But if my squash partner or somebody I regularly hang out with has prolonged changes of behavior, that's the time to look into it. So as you reflect that same thing back on yourself, now, geez, I used to go running. I'm making this up. I used to go running 4 times a week, but I haven't got off my my rear end, for 3 weeks. I haven't done that. That should be a little bit of a signal. Hey, what's going
It's
on
an
here?
indicator.
It's an indicator, right? Or suddenly, on the other side of things, I used to have a couple beers a week, but I've been having, multiple beers every single night. That's also something that should tell you, because if you see that in one of your friends and that wasn't their normal behavior, that could be something, a signal that, that they're self-medicating around something that's bigger than that. And it can be so powerful. And I find you can notice it. So if you're observant about it, you can notice it so clearly in someone close to you. We're trying to make sure people understand that sort of thing, to recognize those signs and symptoms in others and themselves. And then what do you do about it, right, is the next step.
Yeah, there's this concept we use in men's circles where the reason we're there is to provide a mirror for each other, right? The way that I observe how you're showing up in your life can actually tell me and reveal something about how I'm showing up in my life. And so I like that you're saying is, I can actually use the behaviors of my friends that are close to me as a way to just kind of check in with myself and say, well, I've noticed that. Well, what am I doing in this area? So I think that mirror concept is really helpful. And then we could go either way with this, which is, okay, now you notice that someone's struggling. What do we do now? Right? How do we show up there? Because there's like a variety of topics and themes here. It's like, we need to have boundaries for ourselves. We also need to, there's an opportunity to take a stand for this person. And the reason I think so is because Jim Rohn always said that you're either growing or you're dying. So the challenge with routines and rituals is if they're positive, you're likely going in a very positive direction. But the other side of it is true as well. If you start creeping into this area of struggling or behaviors or a lifestyle that doesn't serve you or that doesn't fill you up, then it can actually gain momentum in that direction as well. So can you talk to me a little bit about, let's say you see this in somebody, what is typically, like, how were you there for that other gentleman who needed your support over the last few months?
Well, I actually practice what we've developed in our resource that you're well aware of, our Be There resource, right? And I want to preface this all by saying I'm not a mental health professional. I'm an advocate. I run a youth mental health charity, but we're not a bunch of psychiatrists and psychologists. We're there to help educate young people on this peer-to-peer basis about mental health. And relevant to your question, I think, is the resource that you're well aware of, the Be There resource, which is, not that this is an ad, but it's at bethere.org. And it's been very well received by over 600,000 people have now used that site, which blows my mind. And it's really accelerated through COVID as well, because people are more and more looking for it. But what we did when we found out, several years ago, when we probably only had about, 50 or 70 Jack chapters, and now there's close to 250. Many more young people in our chapters were coming to us and saying, we're now recognizing some signs and symptoms, or people are disclosing, sort of that two-way thing. So what do we do? And Be There was a tool that we actually raised a bunch of money. Our donors came to our rescue. We raised about 600,000 like overnight, and really leaned into building an evidence-based resource that was also engaging. Because one thing we know, all of us, but especially young people, if it's not very engaging, they're just going to scroll on by.
I got TikTok to watch, buddy. If it's not engaging, I ain't gonna listen to it.
Yeah, I won't say Be There is quite as engaging as it's hard to match that algorithm, that's for sure, because it just serves up all the stuff you care about, like, constantly. But it's built around 5 simple golden rules, right? And I don't think we have time to go into them all. People can check it out on the site if they want. But you got to be authentic with that person, and you got to say what you see. That's the first golden rule. And if you say what you see in a kind of compassionate and honest and non-judgmental way. I noticed you haven't been wanting to play squash for the last 4 or 5 weeks, but you always were the first one to respond to the email. You were always on it. You're not saying, what, are you lazy? You're not doing that. You're just saying what you see, right? And I don't know if you want me to go through them, but then showing that you care about that person is huge. That's the second golden rule. And, I do care about my squash buddies, just like I care about my family and you, Jonathan, and my friends, and my colleagues at jack.org, etc. And there's an appropriate way to show you care about each one of those, and that really helps open up that relationship and that conversation. And then you give them space. You give them space and encourage them. And this is a tricky one because not everybody, you can't, one of the examples I remember hearing from a parent who was a little on the aggressive side about trying to help their young person. And, they learned over time, you don't just go into that young man's bedroom and sort of pin him against the head of the bed and say, what's wrong? I know something's wrong. I know something's wrong. You try to find the time that's right for them. Hey, I'd like to have a conversation. It's a bit of a more serious conversation. When would be a good time to do that? And the same woman, I remember, evolved her story to say that she started having the conversation when they were out on a long drive and they're alone in the car. Maybe, they didn't have to make eye contact. The kid is in the back seat or next to her driving. But they found a time when it was appropriate to have a bit more of a meaningful conversation. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to give them a chance to sort of be heard in a meaningful way and not jump in and try to correct them at every step, but just hear them out, which is the third one. And then, just quickly, the fourth golden rule is know your role. You're not there to fix them. You're there to literally be there for them, to support them in any way you can. We've got great little examples of that on the Be There site where, and you've done it with countless people, Jonathan, I know that, where you know that you're not the doctor. You're not going to prescribe anything. You're not going to, use your solutions on them necessarily, but you're going to try your best to help them while knowing that you're their friend or you're their brother or sister. You're not their doctor. So just try to be there for them. And then, if you get educated yourself, that's where number 5 comes in, right? You can connect them to help. So you do that in a thoughtful way and, provide them with a few options because each option won't necessarily fit with each person, right? So I think that's, I actually practiced those things in supporting this guy out in Halifax. And it was so helpful to, just to remind myself, this is something we've learned how to do. Now let's put it into practice. And that's why we love it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, that reminded me of a lot of things. First of all, Be There is awesome. And I've had a ton of fun over the last couple of years sharing Be There. I did a podcast recently and talked about Be There a ton with Jesse Heyman. And he is such an amazing advocate for men's mental health that I was just so inspired with that conversation. And it's so clear that the resource is exactly what you said. It's great information, but it's also engaging. And that's why people can get behind it. Like when you mentioned this driving beside each other, it reminded me of listening to Jason's story with his friend and how they would just sit down in their car and they didn't have to make eye contact. So it felt easier to let it out. That reminds me of just going on long walks with my roommate, Ian, and we'll walk for an hour at a time and we don't make a ton of eye contact, but you'd be surprised at how vulnerable we could be with each other when we're just walking side by side and kind of letting our bodies take over and letting our minds, just kind of release whatever wants to come out.
And it reminds me, if I could jump in, at another example I got from a parent who learned how to support their child. I can't remember if it was a young boy or a young girl, but this is a bit of a privileged family because they play golf together. And they found I think their son would only open up on the back 9. So it's kind of like you walking, kind of like you do in your walks with Ian, but
yeah,
they'd be into it. They'd be kind of into the groove, but suddenly he'd start to open up, on the back 9. and start to feel comfortable about what's on his mind. And so whatever your version of that is, you find the right time and space, and treat it gently, and try to learn different ways to lean into those tough conversations, because they are tough and they're kind of risky in some respects, right? Um, you don't want to offend anybody, and you don't know where they are on this stigma spectrum, so to speak. So you got to be careful about how you address those things.
Yeah, good point. Where they are on the stigma spectrum. Do you mind elaborating on that? Because we started off this conversation talking about context, and the way I look at context is this finger. Depending on how you look at it, means different things. In my body, it's a finger, but in direction, it's pointing up. In the context of a number, it's a one, and in the context of an example, it's an example of context. And so, like, it just depends on how you look at things. You'll interpret them differently. So, can you talk to me about this mental health stigma? Because, like, if you don't think that everyone has mental health, then you might not think it applies to you. And so then having a conversation about how's my mental health right now could actually be very confronting and challenging, and actually challenge your identity, which in Power of Now, Eckhart Tolle talks about how we attach our ego to our identity. And if you are conflicting with my identity, then I actually have this experience of ego death, which makes me feel like I'm dying. And so we get attached to that. So if I'm attached to I don't have mental health, or I've never been open to this conversation, you can see how challenging that could be for someone.
Yeah, I think it's another one of these spectrums, right? And I would say I personally have never really had um, a personal stigma. We, as soon as we found out about what happened with our son, we were incredibly open about it. We weren't, hiding that story. And until, literally to this day, I see families who can't be comfortable explaining what actually happened. So that's me personally. Okay. But we're all different on where we lie on that spectrum, in terms of, and a lot of it comes from our upbringing, from what's handed down from our parents, or culturally, where the cultural conversation is. You hear about lots of different cultures who really they don't really recognize mental health as a thing, right? And so it's complicated. I think it's come a long way. So I think it's not an issue that is defeated yet, but it's you know back in 2010 and 11, when I started getting into this and learning, I said, well, this is definitely going to be a 20 or 30-year objective, and I think we've made huge progress, in that decade or so. But there's still a long way to go, and that's complicated by the fact that uh, there's new people coming through all the time, right? The young people are coming up through the system. They're subject to, what's going on, the challenges that they see, but also the expectations set. I often think of, we did the pre-Jack talks. I used to give a lot of the talks, and before we really got the young people doing them. And I remember doing a talk at an independent school in Toronto, and fully 75% of the young men at this boys' school, it was a boys only school, said, oh, well, our parents fully expect us to either go to Queen's Commerce or Ivy Business School.
Yeah.
In other words, if we don't do that, we're a failure.
Yeah.
Those are expectations. And I'm sure those parents didn't mean to impact those young people's mental health. But a bunch of them came up to me after the conversation, or after the talk, and we started talking about this. And that one really struck me, about not everybody would get impacted by that, but some of those young men would be heavily impacted by that, because they weren't all going to get in. Those are very competitive programs, probably like trying to get into a med school or law school or something difficult, right? And if you fail, and that's what I'm sure that's what my son was going through in part. It is exacerbated because he was plenty smart. He had extremely gifted. I always say takes after my wife intellectually.
Of course.
Not me.
Of course.
Got into the school of his choice. School had always been easy, but then you get hit by mental illness, and you have that shame and embarrassment. He hadn't been going to class for months, so of course he wasn't going to get through that year.
Yeah.
Right. And you can imagine how that just is one more weight. And stigma is kind of like a weight on top of you that that prevents you from, talking about things, from taking good actions to take care of yourself, for reaching out from support. And it is something we just got to eradicate for sure. And what things are like what you're doing are going a huge way to do that, especially with a tough demographic like young men.
Yeah, that's a super important conversation. I'm glad you're bringing it up. How come you think men or young men have such a hard time talking about this? Like, how come you think that it impacts them so strongly? When I look at stats, like 75% of suicides are men.
Yeah. Again, I'm not the experts on the how and why, but my take on that is there is actually, as I understand it, more attempts by women, but men unfortunately take more lethal steps. So that's I don't know if that goes along with the macho tough, but
Aggressive.
yeah, and and particularly in countries like the U.S. where unfortunately
Guns are available.
gun laws are less restrictive and guns are more available. Those sorts of things can lead to that. So it's a more permanent decision in that sort of case. You know, it's I mean, I could get into so many tragic stories because I deal with so many families who've just lost somebody, and they want to get involved somehow. And of course, you learn their story along that journey, and you know whether it's a family I was dealing with recently, both parents were doctors, but they weren't mental health doctors, but they didn't even, recognize that their young daughter was struggling, right? And so even people that are really educated in the medical space don't know how to combat these things. So it's really something we got to get out there to every single family, to every single, young man and women, or et cetera. It's so hugely important.
In the Circle Up book that I've been working on and writing, and it's been a very interesting experience for me to work on a project like this, because the way I think about writing is it's refined thought. So like, I thought I knew what I was talking about until I started writing it down, and then I'm like, what am I actually talking about here? And like, trying to make it cohesive and make sense and make the metaphors connect. One of the pieces that I talk about is about how doubt kills the warrior, and how on the battlefield of your life, experiencing doubt will make you hesitate. And then that hesitation gives an opportunity for more doubt to creep in. And it reminds me of anxiety. And oftentimes I like to describe it the way Alan Watts describes it, is bringing a microphone too close to a speaker, and it creates this loud resonance. And if you've ever been in a gymnasium, you know how powerful it can get, and it gets bigger and louder and more overwhelming. And so this anxiety and this doubt we experience actually creates more space for more anxiety and doubt. And it's like, I don't even have anxiety anymore. I have anxiety about my anxiety. And doubt takes men off the battlefield. It takes men off the court, so to speak, of their lives. I'm just wondering for you, what's been your strategies? Because I know you've been a successful entrepreneur. You're a successful leader. I see you as a strong, positive, masculine role model in my life. And I'm just wondering, how do you work through your doubt? How does that show up for you? And what have you been able to do about that in your life?
It's interesting. I have had a lot of good fortune in my life, and sometimes of struggle. And the first time where struggle really showed up, and I became doubtful, I guess, if you're calling that I could get through it, it was actually for me in first year university, for different reasons. Because although I did struggle with my mental health, I don't think I struggled like at a clinical level. But this is long before your time, Jonathan, but I a province where we only went to grade 12, and Ontario, where I went to school and where most of the rest of the students came from, went to grade 13. Okay, so they were not only a year older, a year more mature, they had taken a whole year more of courses.
Mm-hmm.
And while I did great in high school, I was even, our head boy of our high school, and I did fine academically. I was not prepared for some of the stuff, not all of it, but some of it was frankly just over my head. And compounding with that, because high school had been, fairly easy, I kind of, I didn't cruise through, but I didn't develop great study habits. And
Mm,
that's a challenge with brighter young people.
mm,
And I think that really tripped up Jack is if you don't have those skills to lean on and those great study habits and work habits. And so there was a couple courses that I just barely got through in first year. And I remember, um, you know, that call that I made to my parents, and I was more worried about disappointing my dad than my
mm.
mom, and that's the male thing, right? In fairness to him, uh, he was a very supportive father, but he had learned a lot by the time he got to me because I have five brothers and sisters. There's
Oh,
six of
wow.
us. I was fifth, right? So he had learned a lot to me. So
Sure.
I can only imagine what my eldest brother went through in terms of that. Don't disappoint me. But literally, after I told him that I was worried about this, he said, "Don't disappoint me," which is the actual opposite of the golden rules of how you want to support somebody, right?
Totally.
But he was just a product of what he had gone through. Um, I've kind of lost track of where I
This
am.
this reminds me of what you were saying about these students who are expected to go into this Ivy Business School or into Queen's Commerce. And the interesting part that I had kind of parked in my head, wasn't going to bring up, but I'm going to bring back now, was around not only may they not have the right IQ or study ability or like the chance to get in, they might not even give a shit at all. They might not care at all about business or commerce. Like as an example, the introspection that I've been having with myself over the last year, back in April, I was fired from my job. They didn't need salespeople anymore. And I always say that the second best thing that happened to me was getting that job, and the best thing that happened to me was getting fired from that job, because it gave me an opportunity to be very introspective about what do I actually want? What type of life do I want to design? And so that's the piece where I was thinking about, just like maybe they don't want to go to Ivy Business School. Maybe that's not what they want at all. And so that I could see how this don't disappoint me, this expectation can really create a lot of doubt for young people. It's like maybe they don't actually know what they want, and why isn't it okay to have tons of time to think it over and try new things and test it out and see what I actually want to do.
Yeah, that expectations piece is really important because they do get put upon you, by your teachers, by your family. But I think one of the most dangerous ones is the expectations you put on yourself. And while I feel like we didn't put a lot of expectations on Jack, I'm sure because I was a successful businessman, Sandra was a senior executive at one of the big banks. I'm sure that there was that, well, I have to live up to that. And probably we didn't know how to diffuse that enough. And that's just by having good, authentic conversations about what's important to you. You would be totally fine if you want to be a musician or an artist or a teacher or a doctor or a lawyer or a businessman, whatever it is, as long as it's something you're passionate about. We did always try to encourage try your hardest. I think that was okay as the thing to say. But I remember one of our quotes was, "We're fine if you're a Starbucks barista or a doctor, anywhere along, as long as you're trying hard and you're doing something that you're passionate about." Not to diminish Starbucks baristas; they're awesome too, right? But there's a spectrum of expectations that probably those kids at that independent school were going through because they probably had successful parents and they were feeling, I got to live up to that, right? And I think people really thrive if they're not feeling they have to live up, but they're just living their authentic life, and then they can really thrive in that respect, right? Like, will you go back to sales? I mean, you could sell anything, right? I mean, uh, but
I
on
may.
reflection, after spending a few years at that, do you think that's what you'll go back into, or do you want to do something a little different?
I remember when I did the Bell Let's talk for Jack.org, and there was a question opportunity at the end, and they said, what do you think employers should do differently for their companies, for their employees, especially during this pandemic? And I said, um, they should be investing in their employees. And I reflected on that for myself. Is the reason I was doing the job that I was doing was less about, I'm like a very passionate sales guy, although I could get behind that, definitely that concept, but it was more for me, which is something I'd like to talk about with Jack.org and how it provides an opportunity for young people to develop skills. It was an opportunity for me to develop skills that I cared about, skills that mattered to me, right? Because I'm able to take them and apply them to my entire life. Jim Rohn always said, work harder on yourself than you do on your job. He said, if you work hard on yourself, you can make a living. If you work hard on, work hard on your job, you can make a living. If you work hard on yourself, you can make a fortune. So I go back to sales, probably not, because I took that time to work hard on myself. Even though I was working in sales, I was also doing Toastmasters every single week, which is leadership communication opportunity. I was volunteering for Jack.org, where I was getting opportunities to speak in front of dozens, hundreds of young people, and advocate for something I cared about, become a leader in many respects. And I was also doing seminars and reading books and listening to podcasts, because that was the context that I took on after being influenced by Jim Rohn, which he said, the wind of life blows on us all. The question about where you end up is how you set your sail.
And you're good with quotes, dude.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. The more you repeat them. So I basically live with like a philosopher, poet, artist, my roommate, my best friend, Ian Gabriel. And it's cool because Alan Watts talks about there's gooey people who are like usually like in the clouds and, they're kind of go with the flow. And then there's people that are very prickly and they're kind of like more in the dirt and they want to like have things clear cut and they want their calendar scheduled and everything like that. And I'm very prickly. If you would have met me, Eric, before I met Ian, I would have been just like all prickles. And if you would have met Ian before he met me, he would have been all goo. And because of each other, I'm prickly goo and he's gooey prickles. And it's like the yin and yang. So I get the best of both, which is actually something we've talked about a lot recently, which is probably the best thing someone could do for their mental health, especially during the pandemic, where having your own social bubble is really important because you really can't hang out with a lot of people, is having one person where without a shadow of a doubt, they've got your back, and without a shadow of doubt, you've got their back.
That's what you and Ian have, right?
Totally.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing.
Totally. And I feel like as an example, like who knows, like did Jack have someone like that when he was going through university? Did he have someone that was like, buddy that was keeping an eye on him and keeping, and Jack's keeping an eye on him?
Oh, sadly he didn't. And I think that's a learning for parents. For some reason, like he went to Queen's, and it had no relation to the fact that I went to Queen's. Literally no relation.
Wow.
And he made that clear. What he did say was he didn't want to go, he wanted to strike out on his own. He didn't want to go where all the other people went in his graduating class. And as it happened, not many of them none of his close friends went to Queen's. The other thing, he did have an independent streak to him, and he wanted and was able to get a single room. And certainly I remember, how I bonded with my roommate, back in 1978 when I showed up and there he was in the room, and, within a week we were great friends, and then we lived together for 4 years. A couple other guys joined us for years 2, 3, and 4, but we had each other's back, and that bond is something that you can be a little more deliberate if you think that young person in your life needs that sort of relationship. I have actually heard of young people who go off to school deliberately and even plan their roommate to be someone they kind of go with.
Absolutely.
But I think the world can be much more aware of that sort of risk and opportunity now. It frankly, unfortunately, just wasn't even on our radar. And would that have changed the outcome? We can't be 100% certain. But when I went down and talked to the other students on the floor and the residents, Don, they observed the behavior that had gone on for several months. We talked about having your eyes open to that distinct change in behavior. They observed that. They knew he wasn't going to classes. They knew he wasn't coming out of his room. They knew he wasn't socializing, but they didn't put 2 and 2 together. And that's where the work like our organization and so many others is going to make a difference, because that would have given that residence, Don in particular, the confidence to knock on the door and say, hey, let's have a conversation. And that could have been life altering, obviously. Um, there's also other things I don't think is the subject of this podcast, but privacy guidelines prevent schools in most cases from even breaking that privacy barrier. That when you're worried about somebody,
Yeah.
can we reach out to a friend or a family or
Yeah.
somebody? And most schools have a situation in place that unless a student, because they're over 18, unless a student has signed off on that permission, that typically, unless literally somebody is bleeding or, is obviously in some sort of risky situation, they won't break that privacy barrier. And that's another challenge, not for today, but relates to helping people through struggles.
Well, I got a couple more themes in mind, but I was hoping you could come full circle on this conversation around doubt. So you were in your dorm. You felt like there was this "don't disappoint" expectation. How did you ultimately put one foot in front of the other again? Because that's the big. If I had to put circle up into one purpose, it's to get men in action, get them off the couch, get them off the couch. And it's not that being like, it's not like hanging out and chilling isn't cool, but it's only cool when it's contrasted about being off the couch, right? If you're only on the couch, then you're only on the couch. So how did you get back into action? How did you step forward from that call saying, don't disappoint me?
Well, there's actually something that sticks with me that started before that call, because by the time the call came, I had already started to address the issues. And I'll remember it's a guy I'm loosely in touch with still, and he wasn't in my room, he was in the next room over. And he was in my program though. And I remember one of the things that was really tough for me, because I hadn't taken any calculus, but I was in calculus. And most of the Ontario students had already taken a year of calculus. And, some people could adapt to that and just learn and get through it, but I struggled with it. But it was this guy, his name was Drew, and he sort of tapped me on the shoulder one day and said, "You're not doing enough, dude. Buckle down." But he did it in a way that I didn't feel judged. And I just realized, he's probably right. And I did reach out to a couple of the profs. I remember getting a little bit of coaching by one of my classmates who was a little better at that subject than me. And then this call happened, and that sort of, fortunately for me, it doubled down on I had enough resilience to double down and get through it. But that's where the fine line is, right? If I had been struggling more, or because I did get through, and I could tell I was going to be close, but I was on the right side of the pass fail mark. And if I was on the wrong side of that, and you can't see getting through it, or if layer on top of that, you're truly struggling with your mental health, I don't think I would have got through it by any stretch. But I do affect, and I should correct myself there. If you're struggling with a mental illness, I was definitely struggling with my mental health, and that lasted into second year. I remember I was where it hit me though was mainly anxiety and a constantly butterfly upset stomach. And I used to, I can't remember what the antacid is called, but I used to, drink this white stuff that would sort of settle down my stomach so I could get focused on things, because it was nerves really. And so I was struggling with my mental health, but not at a point of mental illness where I needed professional care. But that's that little spectrum we started with, right? If you're just a little further along that spectrum, it could have had a really tough outcome. And then beyond that, what are the optics around actually failing when you've been doing well all your life? You're so worried about that. And I can imagine how difficult that is in these times for people, adapting to this work remote or school remote or whatever it is, and not being able to bring their best self to whatever they're dealing with, right? If you layer on top of that a mental illness, it just becomes a super difficult challenge.
One of the things that I want to point out here is you mentioned trying your best as being good advice, and I agree that I should bring my best and do my best. But I think one thing that I have misinterpreted with that concept of do your best, because Jim Rohn always said like you should always test the boundaries of what you're capable of doing, and I agree with that. Is what state do you come from it at and with? If I come from a state of like this tension and I need to be exceptional and I need to try hard, then I really feel like um, there's a lot to be learned here around for myself anyway around like I've been listening to Joe Dispenza and he talks about the analytical mind and he talks about when you're in the analytical mind, which is the neocortex, which is the most recent development of the brain. Um, it's hard to be creative, and the analytical mind is mostly responsible for stress and for like this feeling of like this rush, almost like I need to get somewhere. And so, I think actually what I'm reflecting on is I perform better when I'm relaxed. I perform better when I am well slept. I perform better when I have energy. And so bringing my best and doing my best and trying hard actually starts from a place of like, who am I being first? And what I decided to do because of this conversation with myself is when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I'm going to do is it almost seems counterintuitive because my entire life has been I'm going to grab a coffee, I'm going to check my email, I'm going to start responding messages and start getting out in the world and doing stuff. And instead, I'm going to wake up and I'm going to go lay down on the floor and I'm going to breathe deeply for 10, 15 minutes. And when I realize that I don't have to do anything, then I can do anything I want if I start from a state of relaxation first. And so the reason I brought that up is because I'm wondering for you, now that you're at your age, and I'm thinking about my dad who's turning 79 on May 5th. How do you think about that for yourself, this concept of relaxation, this concept of um, matching that with doing your best? Because when I look at you, I see you as someone who's in the world trying to make a difference.
It's interesting. My life has changed so much in that respect, Jonathan, and it's funny. We start our days the same way, but and I'll get into it in a second. But I have learned how to build up kind of micro habits that I practice through the day, and they are good habits, and they go right literally until I go to sleep from the minute I wake up. And for me, it starts, and honestly, it's not 15 minutes; it's 8 minutes of deep breathing. And it's so automatic now that I don't want to hop out of bed. And I would say it's once a month I don't do that because, the doorbell rings or something, and I just got to get out of bed. It's that built into my. And then shortly thereafter, after I, wash my face and go to the bathroom, I do a tiny bit of exercise, literally only about 5 minutes of, well, I'll tell you if you want to know. I do a extended plank, right, which is just good for your whole body, uh, and uh, uh, and then my day starts, and it starts with hydration. It starts with 1 cup of coffee and usually 1 or 2 decafs because I don't want to have too much caffeine. Um, and I get caught up on the news. I take some time with Sandra, uh, and there's some days when you don't have time to do all that if you have a really early call or something. But I've tried to build that into the routine, and then I do another couple bouts of exercise through the day. Um, I've gotten into a real deep habit in terms of how I eat and what I eat and when I eat, that has become so routine and so makes me feel good and energized and good about myself too, if I could just say frankly about that. And it's like almost entirely got me off sugar, for example. I don't crave, and I'm not trying to judge people who love donuts. The donuts are amazing, okay? But I don't crave those things anymore because I've gotten away from them. And I just feel so good when I'm eating what I want to eat, which in my case is generally just pretty healthy foods. And as the day progresses, I do some evening meditation. Maybe I should be doing that at a different time of day, but that's when I find time to do it. And I make sure I get to bed at a regular time every night. And just like, I mentioned earlier, I track my sleep. Um, I also, and this is maybe a little on the anal side, I also track what I drink, because I've made a conscious effort to sleep better, and I've noticed alcohol has an impact on my sleep. Some people think, oh, maybe it'll help me pass out quicker. Yeah, I know, but you have a crap sleep if you've had too much to drink, right? And so I hardly drink compared to what I used to drink. Not that I had a real problem or anything, but I hardly drink anymore, and I keep track of what I drink, and that reinforces me in these, for me, helpful patterns. I'm not trying to judge what everybody should do, but for me, helpful patterns. And it makes you feel better about yourself. It sets a good example for others, and not everybody will want to follow that example. But I have noticed how it's rubbed off on some people, and that's really helped me through this last period of time, because those things are 100% in my control.
That's exactly what I was curious about. Is around what can we control, and like in this conversation, what I'm coming to around men's mental health, around global mental health, especially with all of the challenge that's happening right now and things that are out of our control, is like, what can I come back to for myself and anchor myself inside of? Well, I can anchor myself inside of my meditation and my habits, my rituals. And I'm glad you mentioned in terms of not judging anyone else for the decisions they make, because in our Jack Talks, we talk about filling up looks different for everybody. So it's about getting to know yourself, what works for you, what makes you feel good, what gives you energy, and you're describing things that work for you. And I wanted to bring it up so I could show my dad, because it's his birthday in a week here. And just to remind him that him filling himself up and doing those things is going to benefit me and benefit our family, and keep us thriving and keep us healthy.
Yeah, and it does come from a point of view of wanting to be here for a while. I do believe in better health for better longevity, and I want to be there when hopefully Ben and Julie are having kids and grandkids and all the rest of it. That's important to me. I want to be there, and I want to be there in ideally a thriving way, not just hanging on by the
By the skin of your teeth.
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I'm looking at all of the ideas that I want to talk about on the show, and it's clear that because I see you as a brother and a friend and a mentor, we're gonna have more of these chats. One of the conversations that keeps coming up in my life is around addiction, and being there to support people with addiction. I think we might have to do a full episode on that if you're open to it, because I wanted to park it and talk about one last thing. The last question I've got for you is around, what advice would you have given yourself when you were in university? Or what advice would you have given yourself in your 20s, knowing what you know now? Or what advice would you share with young men who are in high school or university around their mental health, or any of these concepts we've talked about today? Because I'm thinking about, what would I tell myself then, but also what am I telling myself now? Because I'm right there in the middle of it all, right there in my turn 26 this year. And I think this age is so important. I think it's so important. I had a mentor. I was on a call with him for 3 hours the other day. He did a big group session. It was a big seminar over Zoom, and I was listening to him. And he said, your 20s is about discovering who you are. And he said, that's why it's so challenging when people put so much pressure on themselves, is because they don't even know who they are yet, right? And that's okay, and not to have pressure. So I was wondering, for yourself, what would you tell yourself when you were
It's
in your
interesting.
20s?
If I was to tell myself as if I was in my 20s now, it would have been different of what I would have told myself when I was in my 20s back in,
In the 70s.
yeah, I was born in 1960, so I guess it would have been.
Late 70s, yeah.
Yeah, I started university in '78. Um, if and I remember, mental health literally didn't exist as a topic then. And I do remember, I reflected on this. There was a student who went missing, and we never heard anything about it. Now I know,
Wow.
like, what that cause was. Okay, but for me, and maybe it's because I'm so engaged in the mental health conversation, it all comes down to educating yourself about mental health. And everybody doesn't go as far as you've gone, Jonathan, because you're not just educating yourself; you've educated thousands of others.
Right.
And that is also something that helps educate you. I remember getting taught once upon a time, in order to effectively teach a subject, you have to really know it well. You can't just sort of know it and skate through it. But I more think, what would I have loved to teach the my children. So Jack, and I've got Ben and Julia, who are 2 years younger and 2 years younger respectively. And so they were, if you think about it, they were 16 and 14 at the time we lost Jack, right? So we didn't know an awful lot by the time Ben got heading off to university, but we were involved with this work. We knew a lot more by the time Julia was heading off. So we started to have those conversations. But I would be telling myself, amongst all the other things you want to learn about the world, you want to learn about yourself authentically, but you want to also learn about mental health, and that's my bias, if you like, because I think everybody can benefit from learning about their mental health. As we say, 5 in 5 people have mental health. 1 in 5, or in the case of youth, 1 in 4 will struggle with their mental health and live with a mental illness. But we all have mental health, and we can all benefit and improve our mental health just by understanding it a little bit more and taking that step to get educated, and then practicing that in conversations with your peers. I think it'll pull you closer together with people, and it will really pull you closer together with yourself, to really understand your authentic self. I think, why did I go into business? Probably because I don't regret it. It worked out for me, okay, but probably because my father and my uncle had wished they went into business. They had entrepreneurial chances in their younger life, and they didn't take those opportunities. So I kind of felt that opportunity. Oh man, I'm going to do something that they wish they had done, and I got through that. I made that move, and it worked out. But you got to do what's really authentic for you, not do it because you felt pressure to do it from your parents. I mean, a healthy kind of encouragement from parents is great, but not that overbearing, helicopter parent who is unrealistically putting expectations on their kids. So really get to know what works for you. And that, it's really striking to me what you're doing right now, taking this period of time in your life, to travel, really learn more about yourself and the world, really follow your passions for a period of time. I think that is a really cool thing, and I'm really kind of envious in a way, but also proud of what you're doing.
Thank you, man. Well, we've already talked about this before. As soon as you're ready to get back into the world and travel, when the world opens up and lets you do that, we'll meet you in Europe. I'll meet you on the mountains. We'll go hiking. We'll get our poles. We'll get our sticks. You have to show me what real hiking looks like.
Yep, Sandra and I can hardly wait. I mean, it's something that really has helped heal us, to get out into nature and, challenge your body a little bit, but really spend time with those who you love, and in a beautiful surroundings. That is so, it's such a privilege to be able to do that. And hopefully we can get back to that before too long.
I know this is your work day, and so I won't keep you any longer. I just wanted to make a note on what you said about teaching others as a reinforcement of those lessons. That's the biggest thing that I've been getting for myself writing the Circle Up book, is thinking that I knew what I was talking about, and then having to use this desire to teach and share as an opportunity to actually come to terms with, what am I actually trying to say here? What do I actually believe? And like learning about myself in that process, and actually applying the lessons of the book as I'm living my life, refines the ideas over time. So big takeaway for me. And I just wanted to give you an opportunity to share anything else that's on your heart. I know the world is seeking inspiration. The world is seeking leadership. The world is seeking hope. And I think you provide all those for me. You provide that for the network inject.org. You provide that for the people in your circle. So I want to thank you for filling yourself up so that you can give to us, and just ask you if there's anything else you wanted to share before we close this the second podcast off.
No, I think it's so important that you take care of yourself first, so that you can take care of those around you, and you'll get so much back from both of those things. Really, you'll be able to perform at a higher level, and you'll get so much back from helping others. And again, that doesn't have to be writing a book like that amazing book I'm looking forward to that you're writing. It doesn't have to be starting a charity or a group like you're doing. But these little micro things that you can do to help your own life and help those around you, they're going to pay huge dividends back. And frankly, we see that throughout our network. We had a talk with a lot of our Jack Riders last night. We're having a series of them, and we invite the captains into a talk. And one of our lovely young network reps and talk speakers, Swani, spoke to them all. And I could just see the reaction hearing from her authentic story. And I don't know her exact age, but I'm going to say she's around 20, 21. And, I can't imagine when I was 21 getting invited into a Zoom of, a whole pile of adults associated with his charity and authentically sharing what she has gone through. It was so inspiring to me and to all of them, but also I think would build on her because she's giving back, right?
Totally.
She's sharing to help others, and it's going to help her. And she talked about how it was really anxiety producing to go through the training to become a talk speaker, but she pushed through that, and now it's given her so much confidence and capability. I think those are all great lessons for us to pay forward to ourselves so you can pay forward to others, and do those both very consciously.
And if you're listening to this and you're interested in more confidence and developing leadership skills and being part of community, then I highly recommend you reach out to the team at Jack.org who have opportunities for you to grow. Reach out to Circle Up where there's opportunities for you to grow. And I want to say on that last point where you said it doesn't have to be a book or starting a charity, it's these small things that we do every single day. Shame on me for not knowing the whole poem off by heart, but I have to remember it. When my nephew Noah passed away, I wrote a poem, and one of the lines is, every righteous deed, its depths unknown, its lasting effects to which we're blind. So every single act, small, big, doesn't matter, moves the world towards the future you desire in a better place. So thanks for doing that, man.
Hey, it's been great to be here. Looking forward to the book. Keep on going.
Totally.
That's another example of you leaning hard into something. You'll get so much out of it, but your sharing of what you've learned will be incredible. So all the best to Ian and everybody down there. Enjoy your travels.
I just wanted to jump on here really quickly and close off the show by thanking Eric again. All these months later, I'm watching the recording. It was my dad and I in a hotel room in Miami Beach, Florida, just going over the recording, taking notes, enjoying your anecdotes, and just have so much gratitude for you and your family and your resilience. And I just wanted to come on here and share with the listeners that if you're interested in hearing more from Eric, he actually wrote the foreword for the Circle Up book, which is called Man, You Know I Got You: Why the Future of Men's Mental Health and Masculinity Are Not Man Up, but Circle Up. And just so proud and grateful to have Eric kind of put his stamp of approval. Our missions are aligned, and there's nobody in the space of mental health that has inspired me more to get out in the world and share this message. And definitely, without a shadow of a doubt, this podcast wouldn't exist, this book wouldn't exist, and the work that I do on a daily basis wouldn't be as focused and aligned on sharing how we can change the way that we talk, think, and feel about our mental health, and how we do not need to deny, deflect, and avoid what we're going through. Because when you don't face the dragons in your life, what you don't face grows and multiplies. And what was once just a kitten-sized dragon that was not really an issue can grow and grow and grow and take over your whole life. And so you don't need to deny and deflect. I know it's uncomfortable, but if it wasn't for Eric and if it wasn't for the lessons that I learned volunteering with Jack.org for over 3 years, going into high schools, going into universities and sharing this message, then Circle Up wouldn't exist and this book wouldn't exist. And the spaces that we create at Circle Up where men can come and they can take off their mask and they can honor the truth. And men can take a stand for each other, for the man that they've always wanted to be, wouldn't be possible without Eric's influence in my life. So if you want to check out a little bit more about Eric, obviously check out jack.org. You can follow Eric on Instagram as well. And you can check out the foreword in the Man You Know I Got You book, which is available anywhere books are sold. Thank you for tuning into the podcast. If you found an idea here that you liked, that you contemplated, that will help you set a better sail in your own personal philosophy, then please share this with a friend. Support the show by subscribing, and we will tune in with you on the next episode of the Circle Up Podcast. Till then, don't man up, circle up.